Hey, beautiful souls and creative minds. Welcome to the Artist Stoop, the podcast where we turn the art world into your personal playground. I'm Jillian Zepeda, your host, and I can't wait to dive into the art world with you. Each episode will be kicking it with an incredible artist, unraveling their stories and turning the spotlight on the magic that happens beyond the brush. Get ready to discover new perspectives, forge connections, and immerse yourself one captivating conversation at a time. So grab your favorite beverage, maybe a sketchbook, and let's jump into the kaleidoscope of creativity together. This is the Artist Stoop, where art isn't just a thing you see, it's an experience you feel. And welcome to another episode of The Artist Stoop. Today, we're joined by painter Karen Folgner, whose work is inspired by bold colors and techniques of abstract expressionism. Influenced by post-World War II era, Karen's Impasto style brings depth and energy to her evolving practice. With each new piece, she enters the studio with a student-for-life mindset, embracing change and creativity. So welcome to the podcast today, Karen. So happy to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on because I really do love your work. And typically, like how I like to start the episode is how I found or discovered you. And I don't know you personally. I went down a deep dive rabbit hole one day on Instagram.
And that sounds scary.
It was one of those, I think, like my son was taking a nap and I was just like, I was tired, but I felt guilty for taking a nap and I didn't want to take a nap. So I was like, I need to do a little bit of work. I can lay here in bed and I can be on Instagram and find more artists. And I think that's why I was going and then I screenshot and I found you. And I really love your work.
I'm honored.
It is stunning.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, a deep dive on Instagram for me is kind of funny because you'll see my evolution. That is a pretty strong arc, I guess I would say, like in terms of like just how my work has changed over the years. Like I paint a lot. And so I get in there every day and then I get so excited every day. And so it's just like the way that my work changes and like how I'm inspired, like it's really been, actually, I'm kind of coming back full circle right now in things that I'm doing. But anyway, that's, we can get into that.
Well, it's really interesting to me because there's aspects like creatively, like for me right now, where I grew up in a small town where, quilting was really big. And I worked at the quilt shop. I worked, for the women who owned the quilt shop, and I was her assistant and whatnot. And then I started knitting and all this stuff. And I was like, no, those are just hobbies, whatever. But obviously those women have made these beautiful art quilts their entire lives and it's their livelihood. And I am this is, 10 years past, I'm finding myself bringing in elements of fabric and yarn and hand stitching into my art,
magic
mixed with my painting. So it's really funny when you say, you're coming full circle with certain things. So what is it that you are coming full circle with?
Gosh, so I really have like a passion for like abstracting the figure.
Yeah.
And I really do love the female form, and that's really like changed over time. I've gone in a lot of different directions with where, you're really focusing on female lines, and then it gets into more of like the essence of what a woman is, and it gets much more abstract, right? Where it gets into some of the shadows and that sort of thing, and a little bit more like existential, fundamental, motherhood type things is kind of where some of that stuff is going. But then, I'm really actually coming back to really a abstracted, true female form in the natural state of what it is, right? Mm-hmm. So really focusing on the elements of femininity in the objects, right? So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So it kind of looks like some of my older work, but I mean, I like to think that it is evolved in such a way that it's more sophisticated, right? Don't we all get a little more sophisticated as we get older?
Of course. No, and I think that's really cool because no matter what, because I too love the female form and I have kind of done that same evolution.
Yes.
And it's really interesting because, like, I don't know if you had this when you were first drawing the female form. Like, when I first I had to be almost like as if I were in a live studio class, you know, drawing, and everything kind of had
Right.
to be perfect, and all the bits and pieces and bubbles all had to be there. And then
Yes.
people, like, when I started doing that, and because I got really into it, they're like, "Do you have to be so like realistic with it?" And I'm
Right.
like, and then so then it made me
Right.
feel like shameful for creating what's already natural and beautiful in ourselves. And so I'm like,
Right.
okay, well, how do I abstract this so that it doesn't come off to some people as potentially erotic? You know, so it's just like you have to go
Yes.
through like this
That's
whole
really,
evolution.
yeah. Yeah, that's really important to me that it's represented in such a way that this is something with substance and it's not boiled down to something erotic,
Hmm.
right? Like there is a huge, a huge vast line, right? And you don't want to, and you want it to nod to, gosh, the female form is beautiful. And this is, throughout history, it has been studied and the masters have, you know, put it on a pedestal and painted it for years. But you want to make sure that you stay in its pure form,
Yeah, where
right?
it's celebrated.
So yes, yes, exactly, in the right way. So that is important.
So tell us a little bit about like how you became an artist, like in your journey of like
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, that is an interesting question. I mean, it's like every artist is going to tell you, I painted since I was a kid
pretty
and,
much.
I did all these classes. And I'm sure everyone's going to say that. So I'll leave that aside. We'll just assume that that's all true. So I did have a background in graphic design that many artists, and back in the day when I started, it was all on paper and I did figure drawing classes. So I've had plenty of the fine arts background in that world. But like in terms of like, I guess like if the question is how I came to be at this point in
Yeah.
my career,
Yeah.
that would be like I was, you have this want, you have this yearning desire when you're young and really wanting to get your work out there. You just want to show your work and it just would feel so good. Like, gosh, if I could just show people my work and just maybe get it out there and have someone just see it. It's just that really, because it's almost not real if you're just doing it with yourself every day and you don't ever show it to the world. You haven't like actualized it,
Hmm.
right? And so I just decided, I did. So when I was having my little ones, I went back and dove deeply into the fine arts stuff. I took classes through Stanford and Berkeley and wherever I could, wherever I was at the moment. But what I started doing when I really started showing and whatnot, I just decided, okay, I'm going to do one thing a day that moves me forward, right? And it could be something as simple as, okay, I'm going to, study this one master and like, what do I like about it? And then do some sketching, right? That could be one day. It could be more tactical,
Hmm.
right? Like I am going to research websites to host my website. Please don't look at my website. God, it is not updated. Because I think it's like every artist's bane of existence is
Right.
updating the website, which is why Instagram is quite useful. And yeah, so it's just one thing a day that would move me forward. And, researching juried shows to apply to. Like that would be something I could do in the day, right? So one thing a day that would move me forward. And then like, you're throwing spaghetti against the wall and then all of a sudden a piece sticks.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I got to go with that. I'm going to go with that. And I'm going to, whether it be like, okay, this, my work was actually like kind of how I started was like I applied to a show and I got best in show and I was just like, my God, I can do this. I can do this. And it was so exciting to me. And it wasn't a huge show, but I remember like being on vacation with my husband and I'm like running and jumping. I'm like, I got best in show. Cause it was like, it validated me and gave me this feeling of worthiness in the industry, which is really ass backwards,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like, I feel like we should find worthiness in ourselves as artists to start,
Hmm.
right? And, that's something that like maybe over time and maturity, right? Like you realize, no, you got to start with that. start with the worthiness, and then you can, then you can get the validation. Let someone else, decide whether they like your work or not, but you should always know that you have a place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think
Yeah.
that's so important because, the a lot of us as artists, we don't have someone else to bounce ideas off or show our stuff to. It's not like our mom or dad or
Mm-hmm.
a spouse or something. Then they're all like, "Oh, great job, good for you," instead of
Right. Right.
So having that community of someone else like who's in it's it's the equivalent of a chef getting a grave review for like a meal he made at the restaurant or whatever. So it's just like it's like, even though the validation for 100% should always come from inside, like we're all 100% worthy of creating and being in this
Right.
space, but having that
Right.
outside validation from someone in the community going, yeah, no, your stuff's good, like, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
doing something right. I'm making everything that I believe in myself that I am doing is a step in the right
Right.
direction.
Sure. And someone understands you. I mean, that's a beautiful feeling. Like, you get me.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah.
Because I think for a lot
Yeah.
of the
Very
times, like
cool.
us as artists, we are misunderstood a lot, or it's just like I don't think people understand how complex our brains are and how we get from point A to point B sometimes, and it's just like, no, it's there, I promise, and they're like, you're a crazy person in a good way.
Right, right, right. Which is, I gotta say, which is why, like, the podcast platform, like, thank you. It's very cool to be able to, like, articulate what you're doing.
Yeah,
And it's neat.
100%. And I
Yeah.
think like in this type of setting, you know we as artists, we don't get to always articulate um you know a, a very well about our work, outside of just a picture. So when it comes
Mhm.
from us directly, and it gets into the ears and then potentially the eyes of a new listener, a new collector, then it's just like, oh, okay, I'm hearing it directly from the artists themselves, like what their work means and represents. And then also being able to get to see you as the artist yourself. Like if you're watching on YouTube, you get to see Karen's beautiful face and you get to feel her energy. Like obviously, for you listeners, you can feel her energy coming through and just how she talks and how passionate she is. And I'm sure you're just a lot of fun to be around. I'm getting that energy. I'm getting this very high, positive,
Well,
let's
I'm
have a good
I'm in
time.
Vegas, baby. Yeah. This is not normal for me. My daughter said when we came like 6 months ago, and she said, I think that we're ready to go out and live in the forest and never come back. I'm like, Vegas will do that too, honey. Like, I'm raising you right if that's what you're saying. No, I like it for very short periods of time.
And then you go
Very
back
short.
to
But it's good.
your normal. Yes. So
Yeah. Yeah.
what your motto is, student for life, and which I think is such a
Yeah.
beautiful way to put it. So how did this come to be your motto?
Yeah. So, I mean, chasing money can be absolutely deadening.
100%.
Yeah, I think in so many things, like not, I mean, I'm not just talking art, just in the world, like God, in tech and any type of, I'm in medicine, right? Like in it just, I'm raising these kids, right? And I want them to pursue education. I feel like you will always get a little dopamine hit when you learn something new, right? And like we're all looking for like that healthy amount of dopamine, right? Like you don't want the unhealthy amount of dopamine. You can, we all know how to get that anyway. But you have this opportunity in life to just say, okay, I'm just going to find a passion, right? And I am going to pursue learning as much as I possibly can about it, right? And so it's like, okay, we are on a podcast talking about art, and like in with art, what does that come through? It comes through like your own practice. You learn from other artists. Like I have fabulous mentors. Like I have been so lucky in that area. Sculptor Albert Gabara, he's taught me so much in terms of the industry and actual technical use of the materials. And then, oh my gosh, you know who you would love to, Tede Casas. She is a very good friend of mine. And she taught me so much about the industry, and she's a very successful artist. Moved back to Mexico City now, actually. She also uses textiles in her work too. You should check her out sometime. But anyway, and then and then art history, and then there's technical study. You should like always go back. I mean, I feel like the thing that's so great about art is I feel like I have this friend that is going to be with me no matter what, and I have so much gratitude for that passion in that. This friend will be with me hopefully I'm really hoping to get into my 90s. Like I want to live into my 90s, maybe 100. We're shooting for that. And as long as I hope that my hands will hold out and I can continue to paint or find some way to be creative and just continue to learn, continue to strive for that perfect piece, right? And everyone can teach you something.
Yeah.
It could be one little thing. It could be huge fundamental things, but just something. So I think that that's a really nice thing to sit with.
100%. And I think it's really important because, we as artists, there's that phrase, steal like an artist. But I really think that it should be reframed as, be a teacher and a student from other artists. You're not really stealing, you're learning.
Yes.
You're learning.
Always. Well, isn't it so interesting too, whether you call it stealing or not, but you're taking in things all the time from your environment, and your brain's going to hold on to something and maybe not even remember where it came from. And that's going to be translated into your work, and even in an intuitive way, right? That you're this painting, balance here, this and that. This is all, some of it's part of your brain wanting to balance things and so on and so forth. But other things are things from your experience in your past, right? That you are bringing into your practice. Yeah, it's, what's really interesting too. I'm going to give everyone an interesting nugget right now is AI,
100%.
right? So taboo, right? Throw your work into AI and then have a conversation with yourself with AI is really interesting. Sometimes it just spits out absolute garbage, right? But sometimes you can put your own work into AI and then look at some of the pieces and be like, that's an interesting interpretation. Why'd you do that? What do I like about that? Why do I like it? It's still your interpretation if you decide to use some element, and how you use it, how you change it. It's just it's the world we live in. Don't be afraid of it. Think it's so terrible, right? As long as you're not printing out something from Chat GPT or whatever it is. Not Chat GPT that does it, but it's Dolly.
Yeah, I had another artist who uses it. She's like, sometimes I have these obscure visions in my head and I can see the image, but it's just I need it to be a little bit more sometimes concrete. So she'll throw it into chat to get it as the inspiration photo to then work off of and evolve and whatnot. And there's nothing wrong with using it as a tool, as an extension of what it's the same as if you were to draw on your iPad and then change it or morph it or do whatever.
And I do that all the time.
Yeah. And it's just I think it's really interesting as, because what that is doing is, say, that's like having a professor or another art student hanging out with you saying, I see it differently.
Right. Well, and we spent how often are you painting in a collective of artists? Not that often, right? So it's it's kind of a fake person to have a little chat with who has hang-ups about you or your art, and they don't have any ego or anything like that.
There's
right?
No
it's
pre-existing judgment whatsoever.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's really an interesting thing to do. So yeah, there's my nugget for people.
I love that. No, and I think it's really interesting how you have all these masters and other people, like you said, you chose to go back to school and take classes, or you chose to move forward with little things every day to propel you forward, and to having that student for life. You're always learning. You're always learning. And whether it's from the past with all these masters or the complete now and today of AI and technology, it's just how we make the best use of that time and the information we're gathering and how to use it best for ourselves.
Yeah. Well
I
said.
love that. So
Mm.
let's dive into your work a little bit. So you
Okay.
work in Impasto. Why
Yes. Oh, yeah.
why that and not, other techniques or mediums or
Okay.
gels
Yeah,
or
fair enough.
like because it
Yeah.
and
Well,
I
so
love it. It gives it great texture and depth and everything. So tell us how you got into that.
thank you so much. Well, I do love so many different types of art. Like, I mean, hyperrealism and, so many things, which would definitely not use that sort of technique. And maybe it's really rooted in like the Impressionists,
Hmm.
right? Like, it's just, taking elements of that and like, wow, gosh, what is it I love about it? I've had some people tell me, oh my gosh, I almost want to like eat your painting. It looks like frosting. I'm like, ooh, I get that. I like it. But no, the thing about having dimension to the art in almost like a three-dimensional form, I love it because it says artisan, it says this is real. It says, I am a stroke of paint, right? As opposed to, so you're actually like boiling it. I just don't ever, with the way that I paint, I don't people to think that like, oh my gosh, she technically wasn't perfect with the anatomy of that figure, right? Like, oh, like that's not what my work is about. My work is about like, this is paint. Isn't it? It's like almost, isn't it funny that it can look like a person?
Hmm.
And so I really, and you have to use it as a relationship. You have to use it as an element too, like almost like the shadow of the impasto part of your painting, like the thick line is also now an element of your work. And that comes in, which also actually makes it really interesting to photograph your work because it's like, oh, I didn't quite get that,
Hmm.
but so it's really important. Don't you feel like it's so important to see art in person, no matter how good the photography
It
is?
doesn't pick up
Gosh, you
all
got
the
to see it in
details or
person.
the colors or the tiny little wisps of a random color that could be hidden in there that the camera can't catch.
Yeah, it just doesn't translate
Mm-mm.
always. But yeah, no, I really, really love heavy work. And it doesn't always like, the painting will tell you if it needs that.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's almost like a last element, like now it's done,
Hmm.
and that'll be like the final stroke, right? But yeah, so not every painting needs it, but it's an element that you can use that, yeah, it's like that three-dimensional element. And like now this painting is going to come out of me, right?
Hmm. And I love how, like, when you play with textures that come off the canvas, that it's also, it gets that sculptural element, but then it's also playful to the eye, how you look at it and what
Mm-hmm.
angle you look at it. Because you're going to catch something
Mm-hmm.
different
Mm-hmm.
each time.
Yeah. 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 And different times of day where the light moves around and that sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Shadows and everything. So
Yeah. Yeah.
where do you find, because some of your collections have really fun names, so it's like
Oh gosh.
where do you find the
Yeah.
inspiration for each collection
I
or the names and all that?
am totally silly. Totally silly. I mean, I sometimes you kind of, you can keep it a little more serious. Depends on the mood you're in. Like we are as humans, we are all so multifaceted, right? And there are times when I'm like, oh my God, this is just, yes, this is a very serious looking painting, but this is the mood I'm in at the moment, right? Like it's, I will have studio sessions where I think you're probably referring to like some of my pieces that are like, they're lines from Cake songs, right? Where you're just like, you're absolutely rocking out in the middle of, the studio and like painting. And you're like, yep, this painting I totally get, where this painting and the music that I'm listening to is now communicating. And so this painting is going to be named something ridiculous. Or like, I mean, it's even gotten down to silliness where my littlest is super into the Far Side. Like he's super young, but he like absolutely thinks the Far Side is hilarious. And we've kind of like told these Far Side stories, and then they've come into names of my works. And then there are other times where my pieces are more just about motherhood, and I boil it down to that, or it's about female relationships, or it's about a particular person, and it will be maybe the initials of a girlfriend of mine and a moment she's having. So it's not always necessarily about, it's about so many different things. And I just think it's okay to like let it go a little bit. And you know, so if someone wants to come back and ask me why I painted, I had one that was like, it was something about like when Jorge reached out and she rejected his hand, he knew he had really effed up. Like it was something like that. It was just like, and that's what this painting looked like. And it was like, to me, it was like the most hilarious thing ever because this like was boiled down from a Far Side.
That's funny.
But we were, yeah. Anyway, but so yeah, I'm playful with that.
I think it's important to be playful because, like, at the end of the day, like, art doesn't have to be serious all the time and be like about these like really heavy moments, you know? Like, and I think that
Right.
sometimes I was like, there's too much serious and heavy in the world that art needs to be. It can be funny and uplifting and encouraging and all of that. So when you bring in that level of playfulness, it like it translates onto the canvas, and I think that more people will connect to that sometimes more than not.
I mean, and sometimes we are heavy, you know. I mean, I can't say that I am a completely light person all the time. My husband will certainly tell you I am not. But like we all have our moments, and like, you know, you have to cherish the moments when you're having good moments, right?
100%, 100%. Yeah, like I am working on, you know, I've said this before, like I'm working on my mismanaged coalition collection, which is, you know, all about the abusive relationship I was in. However, and you know, and it's pretty heavy. It's really therapeutic and whatnot since I'm so far removed. But like the other day, I don't know where I was laying on the studio floor because that's where I go to do my best thinking is laying on the floor. And I don't know, I looked over at my record collection and I went, wouldn't that be fun to have like paint a record album that was like my life? And then I started thinking like, what if it was like this super playful and uplifting happy where each different album was a boy that I had a crush on? And like, and then of course I was like, I have to go make a playlist right now that now spans like so many decades and whatnot. So that's why I'm like, I needed the playful to take a break from the heavy for a minute. But it's just like, you gotta wherever the inspiration comes from, whether it is something heavy or playful, you gotta go with the flow.
I mean, yes. I mean, and maybe I'm messing up my brand by saying that, but like, you know what? Yeah, don't put me in a box, baby.
Right? No, we can't. No, artists should never be put into a box. And that's what I always tell, you know, some people who are like, but I need to be known for this style or whatever. And I was like, even musicians change their style. You know, Beyonce just made a country album, everyone. So, I mean,
there you go.
Why can't
I mean, and
change
good for her.
my style?
Yeah.
As an artist.
Right. Yeah. And that is a challenge, actually. That is something that like I struggle with because I get inspired in so many different ways and want to go in so many different directions, and like kind of which has what has made me say, okay, I'm going to put this into a series and this is into a series, and it helps me organize it in my brain a little bit. And then I'm like, okay, I'm allowed to do this within this series and I'm allowed to do this within this series. And so, and you know, literally one of my series is called In All Seriousness, you know, which feels more serious, right? And then, you know, so it's, I mean, I can't remember what I've named all my series right now, so please don't ask me. But it's a challenge as an artist because you need to have someone hear your name and say, okay, I know in my brain what they do. It's that's something, but that's something that's like, that's part of the ever evolving thing, right? Like that's part of the education thing. I am always trying to, I mean, maybe that's, you know, as you get older and older, you're trying to distill yourself down into like, what is it? What do I do? What is my brand, right? I don't even know. I mean, that sounds a little more superficial, but I just striving for what you do best. I think that's an exciting thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
absolutely. So, you know, let's dive into your paintings. They're abstract and you have a lot of background space. that's like really open and airy. But then you have the
Yeah.
figures in there, and
Hmm.
they're
Hmm.
not always completely defined, which I think is so beautiful. So it's just like,
Thank you.
where did I just go? Oh, you paint the female figures. So why, I know we touched on it a little bit, but why the female form, and why have multiple of them, and in that particular type of technique?
Well, sometimes it's the relationship between the forms, right? I mean, it's wherever you're at the moment, right? So sometimes you are thinking about relationships that you're having with other people. And so, like, many forms come into it. Sometimes you're having a moment with yourself, right? And it's a single form, and you're like, okay, here's what I'm feeling at this moment. Here's the solidarity of it. It's just, yeah. I mean, again, that kind of goes back to we're also multifaceted. So, like, the paintings are going to translate in that way too. And, you talk a little bit about the blank space, there's the negative space. It's like hugely important in each of my works, right? Like, I'm very considerate of not just like the subject matter of the piece. Sometimes my work is a little bit more non-objective. Actually, I do that as well. I actually love that. Actually, as a complement to some of my figurative pieces, one of my favorite things to do is do a complementary non-objective. It uses a different part of your brain, and it just feels so satisfying to be able to do both, because then you can focus purely on the texture, purely on the planes of color and space. And it doesn't have to be about how much of, like, her jawline do I actually want to bring into the piece? How much of her hip do I want to show? Right. So it's like that is a different consideration when you're painting, but it feels wonderful to do both. I mean, and in terms of, like, you know, inspired by so many different amazing artists, right? Like, so you look at like Diebenkorn's work and like the negative space in those pieces, and then the beautiful like pops of color. And then there's like even like Joan Mitchell, who is completely non-objective. And then it is like, even if there's a big plane of color, it's still sometimes a huge plane of negative space.
Mm-hmm.
If there's, but that's what that's doing, is it's communicating with the tighter spaces, and it's communicating with, it's setting other things off,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
And I think it's how all these artists think and work,
Yeah,
right? And it becomes very intuitive.
it does. And it's
Yeah.
sometimes hard to explain, like, when, like, how we layer as artists.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's just like we don't know how we did it because we were just in a flow stage, And sometimes,
Yes.
like, sometimes it's like, okay, I know I want to have this positive and negative space together to blend in a way to create this story. And so it's just like, have as you
Yes.
go, that's where that intuition comes into play when you're painting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. So I totally forgot what else I was gonna say. It's okay. I can edit that out.
I love it.
These are those.
It's okay. I mean, my goodness, it's a lot.
Yeah. So do you have, like, you're in the Bay Area? Are you showing work anywhere in particular? Do you shows, like, how do you operate as an artist in
Yeah.
the Bay Area?
Yeah, I still do jury shows, and sometimes that's like international and whatnot. But right now I'm very, very lucky. I work with some of the most amazing female represented galleries, and it just so happens that that's how the chips have fallen, right? But I'm represented in Carmel by the Sea, Monica Granvin art. She shows so beautiful in there. Oh man, I'm very grateful for that. And then Pamela Walsh Gallery in Palo Alto. Really lovely, lovely discretion that she has in that gallery. So I'm very honored to be with her. Slate Contemporary in Oakland, I really appreciate them. There's such a fabulous collective there. And then I have another international as well. So no, I have so much gratitude for the relationships I have with those galleries, and they all have a different flavor of my work, actually, and they all kind of say, okay, oh, like, this is what this region really likes, more or less or whatever. But I like that because then it does help me compartmentalize a little bit. But it's interesting how different regions they have a different draw, right?
100%.
And and I actually have a ton of gratitude for that because it kind of validates in my mind that, like, okay, I see why I'm going in all these different directions. But, it's
It still
it's cool.
allows you to be playful as an artist by having those
Yes.
people
Yes.
be, instead of just being copy paste of everything else you've done, by having those different people be subject to those different things. Because
Yeah.
obviously Carmel is completely different from Oakland. And even
Yeah.
even though Palo
Oh,
Alto and
yeah.
Oakland are right across, the bridge from one another, two
Very different
completely different
flavors.
flavors.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I used to have almost a jealousy of artists who kind of found that one thing, and sold that over and over and over again. And like people could identify their brand,
Yeah.
right? Super, super well. And also when I was starting, I started a pop up in Carmel. And that was actually very illuminating because you can see like this piece actually is selling almost over and over and over again. But I just can't quite do that. I can't just to paint it over and over again. I got to change it up, It's something I come back to. I'm actually coming back to some of that work, but it had to be on my own terms.
It always does.
Yeah, for them, it couldn't be for just for the resale,
Yeah.
you know?
You have to feel it
So,
like, as one of the things I talk about with my artist friend a lot is that when we create, when we as artists sit down to create or make anything, it always has to come from here in the heart, and it has to come from a
mm-hmm.
place of joy and authenticity. Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to be happy with it. And if we think about the money first, like, okay, if I make this collection and it looks like this past collection, and I know this type of style sells over and over again, it's going to be just kind of blah. Like, it'll probably sell, it'll be great.
Yeah,
But to us feeling, it won't be
right.
the most genuine, authentic piece because it didn't come from that place of joy and authenticity.
100%. It's what makes commission work challenging sometimes.
Yes.
It's why you have to have the relationship with whoever you're doing the work for and really understand and be excited. And like, I always ask for a little bit of interpretation and a little bit of allowance within a certain range,
Mm-hmm.
right? When I am doing commission work, and kind of whoever is asking for the commission kind of has to be okay with that. And if you're not, then it's not that I'm trying to, be all arrogant about my work and I have the right decisions, but you have to have an allowance for something amazing to happen.
Yes.
And sometimes the painting will evolve and tell you that.
100%.
Right.
And I think that, like, what I always like when I've done commissions, and because I do have a variety of styles, and I'm like, and they're like,
Yeah.
I really am leaning towards this, and I was like, okay, just so you know, like, I that just comes out of me. I can't give you a pre-sketch of what it's going to look like. You have to allow me as the artist, you have to trust me that I am going to give you the best work possible that I feels represents you and who you are and the information you have given me. And if for some reason I get to a point and say I'm struggling with it, and then I might come in and say, can we slightly change up the color palette? Something isn't right within those parameters. Let's have a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and being
Mm-hmm.
able to
Yeah.
work through those things. And building that relationship, I like to have what I like to call like little inside out meetings and really get to know the person and a little bit about their personality first.
I love the name of that, inside out
Yeah, little
meetings.
inside out meetings so that you
Yes.
get to know their personality, not just like who they put
Yeah.
out as themselves into the world, but who they are by themselves.
Inside out. Yeah.
So that you can create the
I
most
love
honest
that.
piece for them and that aspect of their personality.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yes. And
Right?
very cool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna steal
Go
that from
for
you.
it. Go for it. I make a little questionnaire. That's where you can use ChatGPT. We make a little questionnaire for them to fill out, and
Yeah.
see, there's the
Genius.
that's where technology comes into handy sometimes. You
Yep.
know?
Yep. It does. It
Sure
does.
does.
Well, when we all have that super mom tired brain too, it helps. Sometimes spark a little something. You don't get a whole lot of sleep, I bet, these days.
Actually, he's really starting to sleep through the night now really well.
Magic.
However, he does like to wake up at 5:30. So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah, that
that.
doesn't
I'm
always
like,
sit well.
buddy, can we just one
Yeah.
more hour? One more hour, especially
Yeah.
since you went to bed at 6:30 and I did not go to bed that early.
Right. I know. It's so
But no,
hard. Ugh.
it's fun. And I think sometimes, and I don't know if you as, you know, I don't know how many kids you've had, and how old your kids are. 3. Mom brain, sometimes I found that when I do have mom brain and I'm really tired,
Mm-hmm.
and then if I do go into
Mm-hmm.
the studio, I don't overthink. I just create.
Yeah.
And it's a really
Yeah.
fun place to create from, out of the tired. Because then, yeah, you don't overthink
Yes.
and you just do.
Yeah. Yes, you just do. And it gives you, yes. And it gives you something that you can say, yeah, I made something today.
Yeah, it's almost that
And
release
or
of the
I
day.
made progress. Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's a balance when you're moving into the stage of parenthood, right? I think for everybody.
Yeah.
So it's good to not, it makes you feel like you're not losing yourself.
100%. 100%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You got to hold on to that.
I will. And I'm going to remember it. Instead of journaling, sometimes at the end of the day, sometimes you just need to go and be in the studio and release.
Yeah.
Release.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Karen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. If people wanted to follow you or go check out your work, where can they find you?
Right now, I'm going to say the best place is at KL Folgner Studio. So KL Folgner, not Folgers, I wish. KLFOLGNER Studio. That N is, people always miss that one because we all want that good cup of coffee in the morning, but I don't have it for you.
That's okay. I will make sure to include like your Instagram, website, and then those several galleries that you mentioned in the show notes with a clickable link so people can just click on that and they don't have to type it in.
Thank you.
So you don't have to worry about that in there. I'll make sure that they can just go directly to it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
It has been wonderful, Indy.
You are a delight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. You've been wonderful as well. And that, my friends, wraps up another colorful episode of The Artist Stoop. A huge thank you to our incredible guests for sharing their art and stories. If you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on the next Stoop chat. And don't forget to spread the love. Share your favorite episodes with fellow art enthusiasts, and let's build this community together. Connect with us on social media at JGuze Studio and Jillian Zepeda Art for behind-the-scene peeks, artist spotlights, and a sneak peek at my own art. Until next time, stay inspired, stay curious, and keep that creative fire burning. This is Jillian Zepeda signing off from the Artist Stoop. And remember, the world is your canvas, so paint it vividly.